Hey everyone, it's Drayton from Scale Trains and I'm coming to you with another product spotlight video. This week we're going to be looking at the all-new Rivet counter EMD SD38-2. So stay tuned. So as many of you know, some of the first run road names were delayed and they're finally here. We're really excited about it too because there's a lot of great road names and paint schemes in this initial run. Now the SD38-2, there were only 90 of these things built, but they were a special locomotive for many reasons. Namely, they were the larger brother or larger cousin of the EMD GP38-2. And like the Jeep version, it featured numerous electronic upgrades. The Dash 2 system was truly revolutionary for EMD. Essentially, it went to this card system to where if there was some sort of an electrical problem with a specific system in the locomotive, the only thing the maintenance crews had to do was remove the faulty card and replace it with a new one, which were readily available from EMD. This meant that downtime was cut in half. They didn't have to spend hours and hours trying to find the short or whatever problem, maybe a mouse had climbed up inside the locomotive and chewed the wires apart. They didn't have to deal with that anymore. It was just this simple card system. And EMD thought because of this that the SD38-2 would sell a lot more than the predecessor, the SD38. Now something I want to point out right off the bat is that the SD38-2 actually sits on the same frame as the SD40-2. Which has 1,000 more horsepower and was turbocharged. So EMD kind of viewed the SD38-2 as more of a heavy haul locomotive. You didn't need as much horsepower if you weren't running as fast. You didn't have to spend so much time getting a train up to speed, so turbo wasn't needed. They thought that the SD38-2 would be great in applications like iron ore and mining operations, which a lot of railroads ordered them for this specific purpose. But unfortunately, the locomotive just didn't sell as much as EMD thought it would. Only 90 units were produced between 1972 and 1979 when production ended. It did do better than the predecessor SD38, which only saw 53 units manufactured. So things were a little better for the SD38-2, but nowhere near comparison to the SD40-2 or others. Either way, there's still a lot of these locomotives running around, and they sound really cool. The GP38-2 is my personal favorite locomotive of all time, so seeing an SD38-2 is pretty cool because it looks like a 40-2, a six-axle, but it sounds just like the Jeep. It's really cool. I love the 645 prime mover and the non-turbocharged sound coming out of those. So now that we've discussed the history of the EMD SD38-2, let's take a look at some of the road names that have recently come in. First and foremost, we've got the EJ&E, the Elgin, Joliet, and Eastern. Now for you Chicagoland guys, you'll be quite familiar with the history of this railroad, but for you who aren't quite as familiar with the EJ&E, it was established as a belt railroad to essentially go all the way around Chicagoland, and essentially it helped the Class 1 railroads interchange with each other. So instead of going from one Class 1 to another Class 1 where there'd be a lot of congestion, the EJ&E allowed the railroads to run their trains around the city of Chicago and to be able to interchange outside the city limits, which really helped a lot with congestion. Another thing that was kind of cool about the EJ&E is that it really took off as a steel producing railroad, and they essentially helped the Gary Works move tons and tons of ore and molten steel in and out of the plants there in Gary, Indiana. And without the EJ&E, the U.S. Steel certainly wouldn't have become the company that it was, owning all these plants across the Midwest. And the EJ&E was a big part of that. So in this run, we have the as-delivered versions, the simple orange paint scheme with the green numbering and the reporting marks underneath the cab. And then we also have EJ&E's colorful bicentennial locomotive in red, white, and blue. These road names and paint schemes are pretty darn cool, and we've been asked a lot, You know, these as-delivered versions are great, but what about future EJ&E versions with ditch lights? Those are on the way. So haven't announced exactly when those are going to come out, but we're definitely going to offer modern EJ&E in the near future. So stay tuned for those. So another road name that we wanted to discuss in this video is Frisco. Now Frisco had several of these red and white locomotives that operated in the hump yards at Memphis, Tennessee and Tulsa, Oklahoma. And they ran in this configuration for several years before being acquired and repainted by Burlington Northern. That merger happened in 1980. And if you want to learn more about where these locomotives were used and what capacity Frisco operated them, you can learn more about them in our Time to Model article written by Steve Forrest. It's an awesome article with prototype photos. You can learn all about the Frisco SD38-2s, and they look gorgeous, and that red and white paint scheme just pops. And you know what? They go great with our new 86-foot box cars, which are going to arrive sometime in 2024. So if you want to get them, you better pre-order both of them because they look great together. All right, another road name that we're offering in this run is L&N. So we talked about L&N in a previous video with my coworker Josh Singletary, who custom weathered 2 SD38-2s. L&N used their SD38-2s in DeCourcy Yard just south of Cincinnati in Kentucky. And after DeCourcy closed, the locomotives were moved to Birmingham, Alabama in Boyle's Yard, and they were used there for many, many years, really up until recently. CSX operated them there, and currently they're in storage in Waycross, Georgia, but the SD38-2s had a really long, storied career with L&N, Family Lines, and then down the pipeline with CSX. So, of course, we're offering it in the gray and yellow L&N scheme, and they look great, they sound great. And you know, even if you don't model a hump yard, and say you don't model the Birmingham area, you know, as we said in that previous Time to Model video, it's your railroad. So model railroading should be totally fun. And if you want to operate an SD38-2 on a road train, go for it. That's what this hobby is all about. Another road name in this run is BC Hydro. Now this one's kind of cool because this is the only road name in this run that has ditch lights. And BC Hydro is a railroad in British Columbia. And it goes back, the history of this railroad goes back many years from an interurban electric railway. And it's now operated by the Washington companies. You might know them from Montana Rail Link. They're now known as SRY Rail Link, but back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they were known as BC Hydro. And this beautiful yellow and red paint scheme was used from when these locomotives were delivered up until the mid-80s. And these locomotives are still on the roster, although they haven't been used in several years. They're in storage. But really throughout the 70s and 80s, this was the motive power of choice for BC Hydro. And it's kind of cool because, you know, the Rivet counter brand is all about railroad, road number, and era-specific details. The ditch lights on the BC Hydros are specific to Canadian railroads. They're not the standard ditch lights that you'd see on, say, a modern CSX or a modern Norfolk Southern locomotive. They're more skinny and round where the headlight casing is there. And, you know, that's what we try to do. We try to go the extra mile to make sure that those details are accurate, that the ditch lights are in the exact right spot, which I think is so cool. Of course, you've got the nose-mounted headlight as well, which is a feature on BC Hydro that is shared in common with some of the other road names in this run, like L&N. So we get asked all the time, hey, Scale Trains, are you guys ever going to do any short lines? Well, the answer is yes, if we have the tooling for it. Tooling, of course, can be kind of complicated, and if you really want to learn more about how model trains are made, we recommend going on YouTube and searching just that. We did a great video about how we make our model trains from when a project is decided upon until it's delivered to your doorstep. So if you want to learn more about the intricate process involved with actually tooling a locomotive, we recommend checking those out. One of the challenges with offering short lines is that over the years, they often have a lot of modifications made to them. And you wouldn't believe it, just the simplest, smallest modifications can cost a ton of money to tool just for one little part. Thankfully, though, in this first run of SD38-2s, we're able to offer a couple of short lines, with BC Hydro being one and the other being Yankeetown Docks. Now, this is a railroad that I had actually never heard of before I started working here at Scale Trains. It's an interesting story in southern Indiana. This railroad essentially delivered coal from the southern Indiana coal mines to the Ohio River, to a dock on the Ohio River. The coal was loaded onto barges and taken to other parts of the country, eventually down the Mississippi River. Sometimes it was exported to foreign countries. A lot of the coal stayed within the United States, though, and Yankeetown was known as being the first railroad to order SD38-2s, being delivered in 1979, November of 1979 to be exact. Now, Yankeetown is kind of interesting because you'd think with a coal hauling railroad, they wouldn't go with a paint scheme that would get dirty rather quickly, but they went with a white and red paint scheme. And these locomotives just really stood out among the Indiana farm fields. And, you know, it's kind of funny. I always kind of joked with my grandmother back in the day that she was a half hillbilly, because in southern Indiana, there are parts of the Hoosier State that are actually further south than Cincinnati, and even parts of southern Indiana that are parallel with Lexington, Kentucky. So Yankeetown really was a southern railroad in all aspects, and they also interchanged with some of my favorite railroads. So this, although this really truly is a regional short line, it was known for many years for its iconic paint scheme. And of course, later on, one of the locomotives was painted in this unique Can Do America scheme, which we're offering in this first run, which is really cool. This is probably going to be the only time we offer Yankeetown Docks. So if you're an Indiana modeler or a fan of unique paint schemes, you're going to want to order these Yankeetown Docks locomotives, because we're probably not going to do another run for years and years and years. So click the link in the video description to order Yankeetown Docks today. So last but not least, the final road name in this run is Southern Pacific. And thankfully, I don't have to go too deep into the history of Southern Pacific, because Paul Ellis has written a great timed model article about the history of these locomotives, where they were used, when they were used, how they were used, all the variations among the road numbers. So I highly recommend checking out our time to model article. But I will tell you that these locomotives were used in Southern Pacific's West Colton yard, and they were staples there for many years. They were essentially ordered to help replace older locomotives that were being used in hump service at the time, but they did often run alongside older EMDs like the GP9s, the SD9s, and they were there for many, many years. Eventually, over time, Union Pacific, after the merger and all that good stuff, acquired the locomotives and repainted them. So they're all in armor yellow now, and I believe all of them are still in active service. But if you're a Southern Pacific modeler, these are must-haves. You know, and you might not model SP in that area, but these locomotives look great on any model railroad. So consider adding one to your roster today. My particular favorite is the 2975 with the beacon on the top. That's the only road number with a beacon, and of course, it just looks great in that bloody nose paint scheme. So be sure to order Southern Pacific today. Click the link in the video description. Some road numbers are actually have limited availability. We're almost sold out on a lot of these road numbers for all the road names. So if you want one, now is the time to place your order. For those ordering within the contiguous United States, you get free shipping on anything over $99.99. So you got nothing to lose. Make sure you place your order today. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed to the Scale Trains YouTube channel, make sure you do that. Hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to receive notifications every time we upload new videos just like this. I'm Drayton. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time on the Scale Trains YouTube channel.